The only thing you're gonna need is a yoga block or something similar. This one I think is about 3.5 inches high. So if you can find something that would be equivalent that you're happy to sort of lay on. I'll show you what that's gonna look like in a minute. So it could be probably a stiff blanket folded or a towel, maybe a book could work well, but you do need something relatively firm that you can put underneath your pelvis. So you're gonna lay down, you're gonna lift the hips and place the block underneath the pelvis. You wanna feel that the full back of your pelvis is supported, including kind of that sacrum, so bottom of the spine and kind of tailbone area. So the spine should feel like it's kind of suspended between your shoulders and the block. It's really nice and should be fairly happy to be in this position. If you're really arched, you may want to adjust the position of your block or maybe the height of your block. So we want to feel that that spine feels nice and long. Pretty happy to be here. Okay, so getting into the actual exercise. I'm gonna just lift this right leg. I'm gonna let that right leg kind of fall passively towards me. My left leg is going to start to activate a bit here. So hopefully you can see this. This is very subtle, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring that foot so it's just underneath my knee. The closer that foot is to the block, the more intense this is. So I'm gonna start with a vertical shin. I'm gonna push this left foot straight down into the floor. I am not trying to bridge and lift up, okay? This isn't a bridge. This is a little bit of a different motion that we're gonna call a pelvic tilt, a posterior pelvic tilt this is. So I'm gonna push my foot straight down. Notice how that facilitates. If you look at my waistband and if you look at this leg, when I push down in this left leg, that facilitates this posterior pelvic tilt. This hip comes into a little bit more extension as I activated these muscles at the back of the leg and hip here. And my pelvis, as a result, tipped back. I'm still in contact with the block, but the contact has changed. So I went from kind of full pelvis resting on the block to just that kind of upper edge of my pelvis gently resting on the block. I now feel a little bit of length here. Now you could just pause here, feeling that length down through the front of the thigh and into the front of the hip. If you're following along and making this a little bit more intense, this lifted leg is going to start to actively squeeze deeper into hip flexion. So I'm gonna squeeze this guy to my nose. I'm gonna stay breathing throughout. And as I squeeze this guy to my nose, I'm gonna make sure I keep kind of pushing the floor away and pressing this knee sort of away from my nose. I'm just gonna hold here for 2 or 3 breaths, and then I'm gonna release down and relax. Now, I could repeat that, or I can make it a little bit more intense by bringing this leg a little bit closer. So I'm gonna bring that heel a little bit closer to the block. I'm gonna repeat. So when I push into the floor here, I'm going to feel that pelvic tip back. I know that the pelvis tips back because this leg ends up falling just a little bit closer to me. So that hip doesn't actually change its position. The pelvis that it's attached to tilts this way, and my knee ends up falling a little bit closer to me. You might also see how this knee kind of just slides forward ever so slightly, and it feels like it kind of slides away from me. I'm pushing straight down, feeling this length through here. I'm gonna continue to push down into the floor, keeping that pelvis in this position, and I'm gonna squeeze this knee toward the nose, holding for a breath or 2. The whole time, I'm thinking about squeezing this knee towards my nose. This knee, I'm pressing away as that foot drives into the floor. Squeeze it towards the knee, push away, and just keep creating that, like that opposite force. Hip flexor activating, back of hip activating. Release down, and you can go a little bit deeper yet. I'm gonna go into kind of my max depth. I usually do kind of 3 to 5 of these, inching that foot a little bit closer. So I'm gonna go max depth where I can still get a full foot on the floor. Notice I'm in a really deep knee bend now. So when I activate, I'm activating through the lower or the back of this hip, my quad is also activating as I'm sort of putting some weight into that leg. So now I'm activating my quad in a very lengthened position, but it's not dealing with my whole body weight. So it's a nice way to start to give some different forces to those tendons around the knee and challenge this hip a little bit. Okay, so here goes. I'm going to drive this foot into the floor. Let that facilitate that little pelvic tilt. As I sustain that downward force, I'm going to squeeze this knee towards my nose. Squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. Activate these guys in the front of the hip. Hold, breathe, keep pressing down. And then I'm going to release, relax. And before I switch sides, I always like to set the pelvis on flat ground, lengthen the legs, and just let those two sides kind of integrate with each other now. Perhaps you'll notice a little difference between the right and left side. Maybe you'll feel even a difference in how your pelvis sits on the floor, or the sense of how long your legs are. You might not notice much of a difference at all, but often people will tell me things like this leg feels heavier, or it feels longer, or they will feel their pelvis sits a little almost lower on this side. So see what this does for your body, and then repeat on the second side, okay? Let me know.